Hello, everyone. This is a series of videos with some key speakers for JavaOne 2015 for the Java E track. Today, I have with me Kito Mann. I'm very glad to have him do this interview. He's a long-term advocate of JSF, excellent consultant, excellent speaker, excellent trainer, and somebody who has contributed to the JCP for a long period of time. So I guess we won't spend too much time introducing you, Kito. You have quite a few sessions. I think one of the highest number of sessions for one speaker in our track. I guess the first thing I'd like you to do is sort of take us through each of your sessions and talk about, what is it that you'll be covering in each of those sessions.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so I think there's a few interesting ones, and one of the things I tried to do this year was to sort of pick sessions which were a little bit different. It seems like every year I'm doing some talk about, intro, like basic JSF stuff, or, basic prime faces stuff. And so I wanted to sort of go into a little bit more detail. So instead of doing a intro to prime faces talk, this year I'm doing one called, I think the official, I'm looking up the official title here.
Advanced prime faces.
Thank you. Okay, the official title is Advanced Prime Faces. It's a BOF, which makes sense. And this is, I found helpful because I do a lot of prime faces consulting, and there's a lot of things about it that people just don't know about. And especially when it comes to sort of how the components work, also how the client side works. There's a lot of JavaScript, there's a lot of jQuery going on, how all that interacts with the JSF Java server side of it. There's a lot of those internals which are specific to the way prime faces is built. So this session is just going to dive into some of those details, look more into sort of how it actually works internally, how you can actually extend a prime faces component, using, actually extend it directly if you want to add some functionality, how you can patch things if you need to, sort of how that whole thing works. So that's the advanced prime faces talk. And I think after working with a lot of people using prime faces, I think they'll find it very, very helpful. So.
Excellent. It's certainly a popular library in the JSF world. I'm pretty sure you'll probably have a full house on that one. And frankly sounds pretty interesting. Maybe even something that I'll try and attend.
So I'd love to have you.
All right. What's next, Kito? What else?
Along those same lines, a lot of clients, they build a JSF app, and then they may have some performance issues, not necessarily because of JSF, but just because of the way they built the application. So I have a tuning JSF talk, which is a conference session. And what I'll be talking about there is, you built a JSF app. Now, how can you make sure it's as performant as it can be? Right. And, over the years, I've learned several sort of, fairly specific things that you can do, from how you tune your implementation, whether it's My Faces or Mohara, the reference implementation, to things you can do with the actual page itself, what components you're using, how you're using them, things you can do in terms of maybe lazy loading part of the page via Ajax, all sorts of things like that. So this is really more about, like, I have a JSF app, I need to make it as fast as possible. And JSF can scale very well. It actually has been used in some pretty high traffic sites, one of which is actually part of eBay. Their portal, I think the portal for sellers has been written in JSF. So it can handle high traffic, but in order to do that, you need to make sure that you tune it appropriately, just like any framework. So that's another talk.
So to dig in a little bit more on that one, what are the sorts of things you'll be talking about in the tuning talk?
Well, one of them is definitely just specific flags that you can use, because both implementations of JSF have a whole lot of implementation-specific flags that control, like, how they store the session state, that control features which you may not need anymore. Like, for My Faces, you can turn off JSP support. You probably don't need that if you've written a recent JSF app. To things like the number of views in the session, which is a very important parameter, which can affect how much RAM is used on the server, but also can affect how the application works, things like that. Then when it comes to the actual page itself, whenever you're using anything like a data table or any sort of repeating component, there's things you need to worry about in terms of the markup that's produced for each row that you're displaying, right? So if you display if you're doing a data grid or something and you're displaying a whole bunch of users and you have really, really long IDs that you've put on components, or you haven't used any component IDs and have not specified any component IDs, and let's say you have a whole bunch of really big JavaScript heavy components in there, your page might be a lot slower. So there are things you can do in terms of actually naming your components properly, actually paying a lot of attention to which components you're using, whether you're inside of a data table or a repeating component, things like that that can really reduce this page size as well. So
Excellent.
Those are some of the things we'll be looking at.
Excellent. Again, yet another excellent session and why we chose to use it. And it sounds like this should be pretty much a requirement for anyone that is using JSF in any kind of real world application. All right. So what's the next one, Peter?
The next one is let's talk about building professional JSF UI components. This is another BOF. And in this talk, this is another thing I've seen with a lot of clients, this talk is really just about, okay, I'm building a JSF app and I want to actually write components. And this is really any sort of larger JSF project you're gonna want to write your own components because you're using a component-based framework, right? And those components could be anything from like, a certain way that all of your input controls work, and maybe they all display errors a certain way, maybe they all handle input a certain way, to like, really complicated things like a super grid that you're building, which is something that I've done repeatedly for different clients, is sort of build an enhanced grid on top of some other third-party component, or different views that you want to reuse, things like toolbars, tabs, menus, etc. Right? So eventually you get to a point where you want to build those as components. Number one, to make the life of people developing pages easier, but also in larger organizations, maybe even to use it across different applications. So this talk is all about, all right, if you're really going to try and build a component, then it helps to really understand about what it's like to build a JSF component and look at what happens with building a composite component with markup, how you can associate that with an actual Java class, which is a full-fledged JSF component, and then what to do in situations where you actually want to build a component that isn't using other components. So let's say you want to build something that just uses a whole bunch of divs and input controls. Okay, well then how do I handle input? What sort of things do you deal with in that scenario? And then in what cases do you actually need to write Java code to output markup as opposed to putting markup in a faceless template? So those are things I'll be looking at there.
Excellent. So I guess in my mind, you've left the most interesting one last. That is
yes.
Yeah, that is not a JSF talk at all. In fact, it's an MVC 1.0 talk. And it's also talking about an interesting up-and-coming library that most people probably don't know about yet. Right? So
this one's called Modern Web Apps with HTML5 Web Components, Polymer, and Java EE MVC 1.0. I thought I'd try and make a really long name so that people would not remember it. But this is actually tutorials. This should be kind of interesting. It's a couple hours. So basically, there's two sort of tenets here. One is that MVC 1.0 is coming out as part of Java EE8. And I don't know if too many people know about it, but it's basically, I've never been too happy with the name MVC because it implies that, JSF is not an MVC framework, or it sounds like it, and which is not true. JSF is an MVC framework, but MVC is commonly used for frameworks like Spring or action-based frameworks like Spring MVC. So that's where the name comes from. It works well in situations where you are not, you don't want a server-side component model, right? But you intend to build applications that's sort of like RESTful, it builds on top of JAX-RS. So it gives you those sort of features, right? But usually if you're doing that, you're probably writing a lot of JavaScript or using a JavaScript framework on the front end, right? Now, the most obvious choice these days might be Angular, because everyone uses Angular these days, right? But since I'm a component guy, I'm much more interested in several different new specs that make up what we call HTML5 web components. And these are actual ways that you can build elements that look like HTML elements in a page, but are actually handled on the client. So from a component perspective, it's actually very similar to JSF. You build a widget, and then when you use the widget in a page, it's a tag, right? And behind that tag is, and in web components, it's HTML templates and JavaScript, and it could be something called Shadow DOM, which gives you encapsulation for the DOM element inside of your template, all sorts of other things. And to me, it's a very exciting new standard because it takes that whole idea of components and brings it to the client side where there's a lot of new activity. So it allows you to componentize your application that way. And there's actually third-party components out there already. And what's interesting is the idea of actually using that with a Java backend, which certainly many people are going to be doing. You could also use raw AJAX-RS, but MVC seems like an obvious choice as well. So that's sort of where it's coming from. There's one other piece I left out there, which is Polymer. So Polymer is actually a library with a whole bunch of syntactic sugar for building web components. So web components is a set of different specifications which have varying support in different browsers, as is usually the case. There are polyfills which support it on different browsers that don't have native support. But then Polymer gives you a whole bunch of extra, makes the whole process a lot easier when you want to build a web component. So, so by combining all those things, you can build a really powerful application, and that's what we'll be looking at.
Excellent. Very forward-looking talk, if you will. Probably other people will be talking about that maybe a couple of years after you. So very, very, very good. Okay. Kito, I guess I have to ask this question. Other than delivering your talks, which you'll be very busy doing, given the complexity and the number of talks you have, what else are you looking to do at JavaOne? Any specific sessions that catch your interest?
I still have to look at the catalog, to be honest. Often what I do at JavaOne is I pick things that I don't actually do. So last year I went to a lot of IoT talks, Internet of Things stuff. And I think I went to a couple of JavaFX talks last year. I'll just see what I'll do this year. I'll probably still do a little bit of Internet of Things because I think it's a really cool area. Of course, I'll probably look at Java EE talks to see what people are talking about along those lines as well. But I have to look at the sessions. So.
Absolutely, I certainly don't fault you for that. We're very happy to have you, and very happy to have certainly your sessions. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up, Kito. Always a pleasure. I guess before we sign off here, is there anything else you'd like to share with the community, in particular to JavaOne or JSF, or anything else that's on your mind?
I'd like to say that if you are interested in JSF, the JSF 2.3 spec is very much a community-driven spec, which means that you can actually get your not that other JSRs aren't listening to people, but if you have a great idea and bring it forth, we're always more than happy to entertain it, to discuss it. And if you actually have bandwidth or have implemented it elsewhere and you contribute it, you have a really good chance of getting in there if it's a good idea. So that's something I'd like to say about JSF. Other than that, I'm just keeping busy with training and consulting and stuff related to all of this fun technology. So. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kito, for your time, and we will be very happy to see you at JavaOne.
All right. Thanks a lot, Reza.